Our story begins in a city completely destroyed, all because of a mysterious excavation that accidentally broke an ancient seal. Because of this, a strange red mist spread, and anyone who inhaled it would eventually go insane before dying. But something different happened to most other beings. They transformed into terrifying monsters with strange abilities, now called aberrations. In the middle of the chaos, a young man with a mutated arm stared at the destruction around him. Wherever the aberrations went, they left behind trails of ruin, turning entire cities into rubble. The monsters began attacking humans, and fear spread like wildfire, turning into a full-blown pandemic. In an attempt to stop the threat, the military was called, and they immediately launched a missile from a fighter jet. It hit the target and caused a massive explosion in the heart of the already destroyed city, pushing out a huge cloud of dust that covered every direction. When the smoke cleared, our protagonist was surrounded by giant wolves, and he shouted a name. Slowly, the monsters approached, baring their fangs, ready to strike. Realizing the situation, the young man's eyes lit up red, and he shouted the name again, Xiao Shui, where are you? He then charged at the monsters, using his mutated arm to take them down one by one. After the attack, he felt an intense pain in his arm, now glowing violently red. Even though his body had changed, he stood tall among the ruins, ready for whatever came next. His gaze was firm, his eyes gleaming, as he weakly muttered Xiao Shu's name once more. Struggling to walk through the shattered city, he kept calling for the girl. As he walked, he saw an old rag doll lying in the middle of the road. He fell to his knees, repeatedly calling Xiao Shu's name, reaching out with his monstrous hand to grab the doll. But before he could touch it, his arm turned back into human form. A tear of blood rolled down his cheek as he stared at the doll. Alone in the ruined city, he screamed into the emptiness, desperately asking where she was. The story then shifted back to 3 days before all this, when news reported about the mysterious red mist spreading in many places. People were advised not to panic, to stay indoors, and avoid going out unless necessary. Inside a car, we see our protagonist and Xiao Shu stuck in heavy traffic. A soldier knocked angrily on the window, shouting at them to move their car immediately. Soldiers filled the streets, and the protagonist's father complained that politicians could never be trusted. He said the soldiers were sent just to make people believe this was a normal disaster. Xiao Shu admitted she was scared, but the protagonist calmed her, saying everything would be fine as long as they were together. Quietly, he observed the chaos, realizing this was turning into something bigger. He wondered about the strange red mist that soldiers were watching in the sky. Suddenly, a car exploded on the overpass, crashing through the barrier and falling directly toward them. Everyone inside was shocked, and the father was horrified by what he saw. In the face of danger, the protagonist quickly moved, covering his sister and shouting for her to duck. The car slammed onto theirs, crushing it. The young man shouted, asking if his parents were okay. His father answered that his leg was trapped, while his mother coughed in confusion, asking what had just happened. Both parents were injured, and Xiao Shu was terrified. Then, the protagonist looked outside and asked, "What's that?" A massive creature resembling a dragon appeared, wreaking havoc. Soldiers immediately opened fire as people fled in all directions, terrified of the monster. Still trapped, the father shouted for them to get out of the car. The protagonist forcefully kicked the door open, quickly guiding his sister out. He tried to open the front door where his mother was seated but couldn't. His parents begged him to take his sister and run, but he refused to leave them. Xiao Shu trembled in fear as a monster attacked a person right before her eyes. In desperation, their mother grabbed her son and screamed, "Run!" Now, with a sorrowful smile, she told him to take care of Xiao Shu, reminding him he was the older brother. At that moment, a burst of red energy erupted, throwing the siblings to the ground. A massive wolf appeared before them, ready to attack. In fear, both siblings screamed for their parents, who were still trapped in the car. The wolf, its glowing red eyes fixed on them, bared its fangs. The girl wanted to run back to save their parents, but the young man held her back as the wolf drew closer. Above, a giant flying monster added to the chaos in the city. It wasn't only animals. Everything turned into monsters. Even people went insane, fighting in the middle of the streets. While running for their lives, the young man wondered what was happening to the world. More monsters appeared, crawling on buildings and wandering through the ruined streets. They rushed into a store to hide, the boy covering his sister's mouth as a monster passed nearby. His chest tightened in fear as he prayed they wouldn't be discovered. Luckily, the monster passed without noticing them. Relieved, he hugged his sister and told her they were safe for now. But then Xiao Shu screamed in pain as red veins appeared on her face. Alarmed, he held her and asked what was wrong. Holding her head, she said she felt unwell. Suddenly, he caught his own reflection and saw the same red veins spreading across his face. He asked himself what was happening. Was it because of the red mist they had inhaled? He quickly grabbed a water bottle, soaked a cloth, and pressed it against his sister's face, telling her to cover her nose and mouth. But then he himself felt excruciating pain, his eyes glowing red, before collapsing to the floor, feeling something forcing its way out of his body. Xiaoshu asked what was happening, but he insisted he was fine, even as his hand started trembling. At that exact moment, the massive wolf reappeared inside the store. Terrified, his sister begged him to stop as the monster closed in. The creature spotted them, baring its fangs, ready to strike. Desperate, the young man pulled his sister and shouted for her to run as the beast lunged. They managed to escape the store, sprinting desperately down the street. But misfortune struck again as another giant flying monster crashed down from the sky, blocking their path. Surrounded once more, Xiaoshu fearfully asked what they should do. Her brother held her tightly, telling her not to be afraid because he would protect her. Suddenly, a massive dragon-like monster descended straight from the sky, landing with a thunderous impact that shook the ground and destroyed everything nearby. Seeing no way out, the young man asked if this was where they would die. Our protagonist dragged his sister back inside to save her, but she hesitated to follow. Inside, he picked up a piece of wood and said that it was too dangerous outside and this was their only chance. With intense anger on his face, the young man prepared to confront the monster chasing them. He charged forward and struck it with all his strength using the wood, but it shattered immediately. The creature was barely affected and now glared at him with burning rage. Seizing the moment, the monster lunged and grabbed our protagonist, who struggled desperately to defend himself. Suddenly, an arrow struck the monster's eye, startling him. From a distance, Xiao Shu asked if her brother was all right and said she would help him somehow. The monster, enraged by the injury, launched a furious attack directly at Xiao Shu, making the protagonist shout for his sister to run. The girl started running for her life while he pleaded with her not to look back. Severely injured, he began coughing and spitting blood. In that instant, he felt as if his body was being torn apart in agony, asking why this was happening now of all times. Meanwhile, the wolf had caught up to Xiao Shu, who stumbled and fell to the ground, screaming in fear. Just before it could bite her, the young man's arm began to mutate. He shouted his sister's name, grabbed a wall, and hurled it powerfully at the beast, pinning it underneath. In a flash, he reached the monster, his eyes glowing with red light as he stood above it, holding a weapon. Overcome with rage, he stabbed its head repeatedly, screaming for it to disappear. Xiao Shu watched, terrified and confused by the horrifying sight. She rushed to hug him from behind, begging him to stop. Hearing her pleas, the young man slowly calmed down and returned to normal. He remembered his mother's last desperate words, telling him to run. Even while injured, his parents smiled at him, entrusting him with the care of his sister as the eldest. The memory of happier times resurfaced, of his parents saying they had to survive no matter what. Back in the present, the protagonist returned to his human form and called out his sister's name. Xiao Shu, with tears in her eyes, worried for her brother. He smiled and apologized for making her worry, asking if she was okay. But before she could answer, a massive monster appeared in the reflection of the window behind them. It smashed through the wall, forcing him to shield his sister in his arms. A gigantic bird-like monster screeched menacingly at the siblings. Our protagonist prepared to fight and called it an ugly bird. He shouted for it to stay away from his sister and bravely charged forward with his staff. With a powerful strike, he managed to push the beast back. After the attack, he told Xiaoshu to hide, saying he would handle the monsters. He explained that the largest one of all was watching them, and he needed to lure it away. Terrified, Xiaoshu clung to him, begging him not to go, afraid he might lose control again. He calmed her with a gentle pat on the head, promising he wouldn't lose himself this time. Holding her tightly, he asked her to just wait and assured her he would come back. Xiaoshu made him promise to return safely. He smiled confidently and said he would definitely come back for her. As he ran off to lure the monsters away, he thought that perhaps hunting and absorbing the creatures' energy could make him stronger. So, with determination, he confronted a new monster, believing he could gain the power he needed to protect his family. He shouted for it to fall while staring with fierce resolve. But the giant ignored him, and instead, several wolves surrounded him. He complained that it wouldn't even bother to fight him directly. Furious, he prepared for battle, declaring he would carve his own path to the boss. He fought the wolves fiercely, landing a heavy strike with his staff. But one of them bit into his arm, enraging him. His arm transformed again, and he tore the wolf apart, shouting for them all to vanish. With a twisted grin, he wondered if this was what power felt like, and said it felt incredible. In the sky, an old warplane suddenly appeared, flying straight toward the giant monster. Noticing it, the creatures quickly retreated from the young man, which confused him. Looking at his mutated arm, he questioned what was happening to him. But then the warplane launched a missile directly at him. Alarmed, Xiaoshu emerged from her hiding spot, but he desperately shouted for her to stay back. The missile struck the ground, triggering a massive explosion that destroyed everything nearby. The warplane flew overhead as someone said there was still a survivor. Soldiers arrived but decided to abandon the protagonist, claiming he was infected, and took only Xiaoshu with them. One of the soldiers grabbed the girl and rushed her away. Left behind, our young man lay helpless on the ground, stretching his hand out and calling his sister's name as he was left behind. Surrounded by raging flames, there was sadness and resentment on Xiaoshu's face as she asked her brother a painful question: why didn't he save her? Why didn't he come for her? Meanwhile, the young man desperately shouted his sister's name. In the fire of the nightmare engulfing him, the form of his transformed arm could be seen. And then, our protagonist suddenly woke up, gasping for breath and drenched in sweat from the terrifying nightmare. Holding his head, he cursed, realizing that the same nightmare had returned again, and wondered where his sister was now, since it had already been half a year. Fortunately, his secret was still safe. He stood up, took his things for work, and recalled all the shelters he had searched. Yet he did not find a single trace of Xiaoshu. Because of this, he joined the border patrol, hoping it would be easier for him to search. Now, the base of Chishi City was shown, a place that had clearly lost its former glory, now ruined and broken. There, he was greeted by the captain, Jia Jun, and immediately apologized for being late to his shift. But the captain had no patience. He kicked him hard and called him a useless rookie. He was ordered to climb the watchtower and was threatened not to make mistakes. From above, our protagonist saw the whole city and the red mist that had destroyed it 6 months ago. He stared at the tower, wondering if the monster he once saw was still there. While smoking a cigarette, the captain said that if the special unit couldn't handle that thing, then there was nothing they could do. A soldier mentioned that the special unit was famous, but the captain only laughed, doubting if it was even possible for them to fail. Another soldier said that the unit had already killed countless aberrations since then. Meanwhile, our protagonist grew irritated by the smell of the red mist, which seemed to make the monsters even fiercer. Then he noticed something strange: the crimson mist was moving abnormally. And then he realized that something was approaching, and it was moving fast. One of the soldiers quickly gave a warning, but the captain only silenced him. The soldier insisted on explaining why the mist seemed to be heading directly toward them. The captain's eyes widened when he saw that the special response unit itself was running away, fleeing for their lives. The soldiers asked what was happening, but the captain shouted for them to retreat immediately. Suddenly, one of them was struck, and the captain panicked, shouting for everyone to fall back. But then a sharp claw suddenly grabbed the captain, making him scream in fear. From the darkness, a giant monster emerged, and the captain thought that this was the end for him. From the tower, our protagonist heard the desperate screams as everyone struggled to escape. Amidst the chaos, he decided to jump down from above to help. At that moment, a bolt of lightning struck the ground, right in front of the giant creature. Our protagonist used his transformed arm and brought down one monster. But a much larger aberration appeared immediately, intending to swallow him whole. Yet he was fast. He struck a powerful blow and cut off the monster's head, adding to his count. With his monstrous hand, he began absorbing the energy from the defeated aberration. He felt himself growing stronger and wondered what would happen if he could absorb even more. At that point, more monsters appeared, but he continued his count. With a grin on his face, he told the monsters, "Don't disappoint me." Suddenly, a beam of energy struck one of the creatures. Shocked, he turned, wondering who had come to help. And then, the captain of the Blazing Blood detachment, Song Rui, appeared, wearing a serious expression. Our protagonist grew nervous when he realized that this man was part of the Special Response Unit. He quickly tried to return his arm to normal before it could be noticed. But Song Rui wasn't interested in any explanation. Instead, he ordered them to wipe out all the remaining monsters. The soldiers moved quickly and immediately surrounded our protagonist. He raised his hands and introduced himself, but the captain still ordered them to fire. But instead of him being hit, the soldiers destroyed the aberration standing right behind him. They confirmed the target was finished, as the monster's body slowly disintegrated. Then Song Rui approached slowly, asking about his weapon. And at that moment, our protagonist realized he was doomed. He had no answer. The captain ordered all units to retreat from the outpost to the temporary defensive line, and at the new location a guard announced that no one would be allowed to enter without Officer Song's permission. The leader glanced at a tablet containing the incident report, which recorded a total of 37 casualties. 2 from the Special Response Unit of the Ember Blood Squad, and 30 from the patrol team, ending the casualty report for this incident. This made our protagonist nervous, as it seemed he would be the next to be targeted. Tied to a chair, he asked why he was imprisoned when he too was a victim, but the woman pointed out that he had abandoned his post for 2 hours, and the attack occurred upon his return. Why? Did he think they owed him an explanation? Forced to come up with an excuse, he gave a flimsy reason, claiming he had only dozed off nearby and informed his captain. Suddenly, a soldier entered and reported that he was often late and never scolded by the captain. Enraged, he glared and warned the soldier not to drag the captain into this. The officer merely observed the scene and remarked that their patrol team seemed to have many problems. Meanwhile, far away, the captain he had saved lay wrapped like a mummy in a hospital bed, suddenly sneezing violently with blood, worrying the soldier guarding him. The doctor assured him not to worry, saying he wouldn't die yet, as all his test results were normal. The soldier asked if that was really normal. Back in the interrogation, the woman looked at the protagonist's file and noted that he had only passed basic training for nearly 3 months. In the last battle, 2 members of the Special Response Unit died, raising suspicion about how he had survived. He defended himself by saying he was simply afraid of dying and, being a former track team member, ran away quickly when he saw the crimson mist approaching. The captain asked why he had joined the army at all if he was afraid of death. Did he have no purpose? In his mind, he revealed his true reasons: to search for his sister, and to absorb strength from monsters to become stronger. For 6 months, he had been alone, wandering through ruins in search of his sister. He was gradually learning to control his transformation between beast and human form. During that half-year, he avoided people like a lone wolf, using primitive methods to search through every ruin and visiting every human settlement just to find his sister. The captain approached him, accusing him of being a coward who abandoned his post and hid information. She seriously asked if he understood the punishment that awaited him, prompting him to ask if she meant to finish him off. She drew closer and asked about his hands, making him realize she had seen his arm. She whispered in his ear, asking why he lied and what his true purpose was. Suddenly, a violent earthquake shook the entire place, forcing everyone to prepare. The captain asked if it was an earthquake, but the protagonist felt a familiar sensation. He quickly stood and shouted for them to run because a horde of monsters was approaching, but the officer didn't believe him and accused him of trying to escape. She used a strange electric power to knock him to the floor, demanding if he was disregarding her. Other guards worriedly told her to calm down as she was going too far. With the impact, the floor gave way, and they all fell together into a deep pit. After the fall, they found themselves in a dark place, and the officer wondered where they were. Still in chains, the protagonist noticed they seemed to be in an underground area. Irritated by the darkness, the leader ordered one of her men to provide light immediately. A soldier called him a disaster, but he retorted that they could report him once they got out. One soldier pulled out a glow stick and lit it, revealing that they were inside a massive labyrinth likely dug out by monsters. The leader ordered everyone to calm down and perform a weapons check, then grabbed her rifle and commanded them to stay in formation and guard the rear. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed through the cave walls, making everyone uneasy. The protagonist sensed something in one direction and stared. A soldier asked what he was doing, and he replied that he heard wind, which excited the soldier, thinking it might be an exit. The soldier checked and confirmed there was indeed a breeze, praising the protagonist's sharp hearing. He saw a light, but suddenly an insect monster appeared, causing the protagonist to shout at him to get away. It fired a strange projectile that nearly hit the soldier, and the captain immediately retaliated with gunfire. The creature's sticky fluid seeped into the ground, and the protagonist warned them not to let it get close. The leader scolded the soldier for acting without orders, and he nervously agreed out of fear. The woman glanced at the protagonist and said that once they got out, he would have much to explain. The protagonist realized that the officer knew his secret but hadn't exposed him yet, leaving him wondering about her game. Suddenly, the strange sound echoed again, and they realized more were coming. A massive swarm of insect monsters emerged, all with glowing red eyes and sharp teeth, surrounding them in a terrifying horde that drove one soldier into panic. A soldier cursed and asked why there were so many insects here. The protagonist declared that they were now facing a huge problem. The monsters charged, ready to pounce on the surrounded group, but the leader wasted no time and immediately opened fire to try and create a path, forcing everyone to run while continuously shooting at the relentless monsters chasing them. The officer shouted at our protagonist not to stop running, saying now was not the time to hesitate. He then noticed that the chase had suddenly stopped and pointed out that the entire horde seemed to halt, making them all look ahead where a soldier pointed toward a massive cave. Inside, they saw a colossal monster absorbing the crimson mist. From there, it began gathering the mist into a red energy ball in its mouth. Sensing the imminent danger, our protagonist shouted to warn them all to be careful because that thing was extremely dangerous. The officer used her weapon and fired at the monster from afar, but the creature immediately released an immensely powerful red beam of energy in their direction. The purple energy from the leader clashed in the air with the crimson beam of the beast, and the woman's attack struck the monster's face, causing it to stagger slightly. Meanwhile, the monster's attack nearly reached the leader's face, and someone shouted to warn her to dodge, but our protagonist quickly leapt in front of her and used his transformed arm to block the beam. Shocked, the officer stared at his arm, but he said he would explain everything once they made it out alive. Facing the massive creature, he vowed that once this was over, he would tell the whole truth, causing the officer to worry since even her attacks had no effect, but he only smiled confidently and told her not to worry as he turned to fight. At that moment, he rushed toward the monster at full speed, declaring it was time to begin. He thought the monster was also of dominator class like him, while a screen displayed the monster ranks. He landed consecutive heavy punches on the beast's body, wondering how strong he would become if he absorbed it. After landing on the ground, he realized his attacks had no effect. In his mind, he admitted the monster was tough, and if it were ordinary, it would have fallen long ago, but this one was like a tank, likely having devoured many others like it. The giant monster struck with massive claws, but the protagonist easily dodged and remarked that its movements were slow, thinking all its points must have been placed in defense. His eyes gleamed as he mocked the monster, calling it nothing more than a walking punching bag. The other soldiers also fired, but their bullets had no effect, making one ask if he was just dreaming. He recalled that the protagonist used to be a coward who always ran away, but now he was fighting like a monster, leading him to question who this man really was. The officer fabricated a story, claiming he was a secret government experiment created to fight monsters, which a soldier questioned since he knew him as a coward, but the woman insisted she only confirmed it when he saved her. Another officer, Lin Yangji, asked if the captain was hiding something, but the woman continued her lie, saying he had escaped from a laboratory and infiltrated their patrol, warning the soldier that the information was highly classified and forbidden to tell anyone. Meanwhile, the monster prepared another red energy ball and unleashed it directly at the protagonist, who immediately felt the extreme danger and was forced to act. He shouted for everyone to move away as the red ball drew closer, and when it struck the ground, it caused a massive explosion that created an enormous wave of dust. As the smoke gradually cleared, the officer stood, still alive though shocked, along with the soldier who had survived and was astonished to still be intact after the blast. That was when he noticed Officer Yangji had shielded him, and he called his name in worry. Yangji's leg was severely injured, but he accepted it as a fair trade for a life. The wounded officer said he didn't become a soldier just to fight monsters but to protect humanity, and that he would never abandon his comrades. On the other hand, the monster struck again with its claws, hurling the protagonist far away. Lying on the ground, he cursed when he noticed the mist's energy had run out, his arm reverting to normal, leaving him completely powerless. He faced the Dominator class creature and realized the situation had only become worse. Suddenly, a loud gunshot rang out, followed by an explosion that struck the monster's head, surprising our protagonist. He turned and remembered the leader, Song Rui. She called out to him, telling him he must not die here because there were still many things he needed to explain to her. After being hit by the purple beam, the monster only stared at the woman and seemed to laugh. She was shocked by the creature's reaction and asked if it was really mocking her attack. Right after, the red mist poured out from the rifts and went straight toward the colossal monster. The leader realized it was restoring its strength and healing all its wounds. She understood that it could draw in mist from different places to regain its full power. Because of this, she shouted for them to retreat, but the protagonist refused, saying that today this monster would fall. He declared that the red mist was also making him stronger, and this was the best chance to strike. The officer warned him that if the plan failed, this could be his last battle. But he answered that he had already faced death many times, so what was one more? At that point, she agreed and said they only had one chance. She would unleash all her power to shatter the armor on the monster's head, and it was the protagonist's duty to destroy its brain. The leader aimed at the monster's head, preparing for her strongest attack. Then she released all her power while our protagonist charged in for the final strike. The blast hit directly, breaking the protection on the monster's head and opening the chance he needed. He seized it, leaping to strike the monster's weak point. Along with a furious roar, he unleashed a flurry of attacks. His strikes pierced through its skull, causing green blood to spurt out. From afar, the officer watched the scene, wondering if they had finally won. But suddenly, energy burst out and hurled the protagonist away with overwhelming force. The monster's body began to dissolve, and the woman screamed his name in worry. She ran to help him and found him lying unconscious, injured after the battle. While checking his pocket, she found something and wondered what it was. The officer picked up a photograph, while in the unconscious protagonist's other hand was a crystal. Suddenly, a sharp object pierced into his palm and began fusing with his body. In his mind, he asked where he was and why he couldn't control his body. Then he realized he had become a monster and questioned if this was his life flashing before his eyes. All of a sudden, a structure resembling DNA glowed intensely, though he could not understand why. Now, the crystal was embedded in his chest, and he realized he could move again. When he opened his eyes, he felt something strange in his chest. He recognized it as the monster's crystal and wondered how it ended up inside his body. The stone in his chest began absorbing the red mist again. He understood that the crystal could store the mist, and because of this, he would no longer lose control. This way, he could absorb other monsters to evolve without the fear of rampaging. However, there was a limit to the newly formed crystal, and it was absorbing the red mist excessively. The protagonist realized that at the rate it was being absorbed, the thing inside his chest could explode. He remembered the giant beetle that had used enormous amounts of mist and decided to let the crystal take it all in. The scene shifted, showing our protagonist lying on a hospital bed, surrounded by red energy. His eyes glowed red as he struggled to control all the power. He sat up and shouted while concentrating the red mist into an energy ball in his hand. At that moment, the officer entered the room and saw him holding that ball, calling his name and asking what he was trying to do. Then he hurled the energy ball toward the leader and shouted for her to get away immediately. At that moment, the energy ball exploded outside the building with devastating force. The scene returned to 5 minutes earlier at the hospital, where the group was resting after the recent battle. A soldier approached the captain and mentioned Deputy Lin's leg, but she assured him it was fine. In his room, Deputy Lin asked what the truth really was about our protagonist. The officer replied that the case of our protagonist was highly confidential and advised him to focus on his own recovery. She also told him that she had already requested his transfer to the logistics department so he could rest. She informed him that she would faithfully report everything to his father, Chief Song Lien. Deputy Lin pressed further, but she immediately cut the communication and ordered him not to go anywhere. Moments later, as she walked down the hallway, she asked a guard where our protagonist was. The soldier informed her he was in room 314, and she was escorted there right away. Upon reaching the door, she ordered the guard to stand watch and not let anyone in. When she opened the door, she found our protagonist holding a red energy ball. He was already losing control, so the officer called out to him in worry. But our protagonist shouted for her to get away and immediately hurled the ball in her direction. She quickly ducked to avoid the attack that flew past at incredible speed. The energy ball exploded outside the room, nearly hitting the guard. The blast shot into the air and struck 3 abandoned buildings nearby, completely destroying them in its path. From his room, Deputy Lin saw the destruction and wondered how the captain would cover up the incident. Meanwhile, the poor guard collapsed in fear, trembling as he muttered that he was always unlucky, begging for help since he didn't want to die yet. The officer recognized the beetle's attack and asked how our protagonist was able to use its ability. With a serious look, she turned to him and said he had a lot of explaining to do. The scene shifted to the rooftop of the hospital, where they had a serious conversation. With her arms crossed, she asked if he could absorb monster cores and learn their techniques. Our protagonist explained that he could absorb and store the red mist, and the crystal in his chest would automatically adjust. The captain gave him a mocking smile, saying he truly had many special qualities. Our protagonist admitted he had indeed gained their strength, but he feared that he might also turn into a monster. At that moment, he looked her in the eyes and asked if someone like him could still be considered human. She answered that he was different, and everything depended on how he used his power. The captain continued, saying that his strength was both a danger and a powerful weapon. She then laid out 2 paths. The first was for him to join her team as a reserve soldier, and the second was to be treated as a threat and eradicated like the other creatures. Our protagonist repeated the word, eradicated, with a serious expression. She pointed toward the destroyed buildings and asked if he thought the city's troops could really handle him. She called him arrogant and offered him several benefits if he joined her unit. But he doubted her and asked why she would risk recruiting someone like him. The officer admitted that she needed him for a specific purpose but insisted they were not enemies. She gave him a mysterious look, as if still hiding something from him. Then she handed him something, saying he could treat it as a deal. When he saw it, our protagonist was shocked. It was a photo of him and his younger sister. Stunned, he asked how she had gotten it. The woman told him not to underestimate her and offered to help him find his sister using her intelligence network. Our protagonist realized that on his own he had limits, and the investigation would be much easier if someone of high rank was involved. He accepted the deal but stated that since she was desperate to have him, he had one condition. With a playful smile and his hand behind his head, he demanded higher pay since he had spent everything searching for his sister. The captain approved him as a reserve soldier with the highest salary and ordered that his papers be processed. Our protagonist gave a respectful gesture and said he would go to the patrol team to arrange his transfer. As he walked away, he suddenly seemed to recall something important, pausing slightly in deep thought. The captain informed him that she had paid for the hospital damages but would deduct it from his salary. A flash of memory passed through his mind, of a wounded man he had promised to save. Watching him walk away, she felt that this young man was the key to what she sought. She believed our protagonist held the secret to turning a monster back into a human. And our protagonist arrived at the Chishi City Patrol building to process his transfer, and at that moment he asked the man who got down from the military truck if he was also heading to the Special Response Unit. The man introduced himself as a trusted aide of Captain Song and Deputy Lin and said that they should work together since both of them were praised by their respective captains, but our protagonist tried to recall the boy's name and realized he had never paid attention to him. Suddenly he waved to someone, excitedly saying that Captain Jia was fine and had recovered, so our protagonist looked in the direction he was pointing and saw the captain surrounded by several soldiers. A big thug immediately mocked Captain Jia, reminding him that he was attacked just because of a woman. This was Zhang Shi, who instantly kicked him and called him a government beggar. Yan Hao could not stand that cowardly act and quickly rushed forward, but he was easily defeated and thrown to the ground. Zhang Shi grabbed Jia by the jaw and threatened him, forcing him to kneel and lick his shoes, while warning that if Jia did not obey, he would break the young man's arm so he would need crutches. The wounded captain trembled with rage and humiliation and was about to kneel little by little to protect his comrade, but our protagonist stopped him and said there was no need to kneel. He smiled and said that Jia had once helped him, and it was time to return the favor, along with a threat that he would break the bones of anyone who laid a hand on Captain Jia. The men were shocked and could not believe our protagonist's boldness, so in anger they charged at him shouting that he was seeking death. But he was not nervous at all and prepared for battle with a cold expression. He swiftly kicked the first one and began counting, elbowed the second, swept the legs of the third until he fell, and punched the fourth with full force, sending him flying and crashing into the wall that left a small crack. In just a few seconds, all the thugs were lying on the ground, completely defeated. One of them widened his eyes and shouted that their captain was an E-rank warrior and wondered how the protagonist could be that fast. He quickly pulled out a gun and called him trash of the patrol team, but our protagonist only smiled and fearlessly dodged the bullet, swiftly disarmed him, and said that the problem was he was too slow. The shot was far too slow, then crushed the gun with his bare hand and added that the man did not even reach 1% of Song Rui's speed. Because of this, the thug drew a knife and angrily charged, but our protagonist immediately grabbed his arm and effortlessly restrained him, held him by the neck and asked if he was the one who would make Captain Jia kneel, but before he could explain it was too late. With a cold glare, our protagonist said it was time for him to be brought down, and with full strength he slammed the thug onto the floor, creating a large crack. He lost consciousness right in the middle of the fissure he had made. The other soldiers were stunned that he had dodged a bullet and even crushed a gun with his hand. And at that moment our protagonist realized that the strength from the beast core had already surpassed his expectations. Terrified, the other thugs ran away shouting that he was a monster. The young man came closer and said he looked like a god of war and asked if he was alright, while Captain Jia expressed his gratitude, but our protagonist replied that Jia always took care of him so this was his way of giving back. Ja worriedly asked what would happen if the city defense team opposed them, but our protagonist assured him that since they were already part of the special unit, the defense team would not dare. At the temporary base of the Chishi City Special Response Unit, he was asked if his transfer papers were completed, and the captain confirmed that everything was settled and he had already submitted the application to join the headquarters team, showing the tablet with the approved form for evaluation. Our protagonist praised his efficiency and asked if he was officially a member, but the woman reminded him not to be hasty because the real test was still ahead. He needed to leave immediately for headquarters in Huching for the Burning Blood Combat Division evaluation. The woman said she believed it would not be a problem for him, and with confidence our protagonist replied that he would set a new record. As they traveled toward Hucheng City, the convoy of military vehicles sped across the long bridge. It was a large convoy, lined with war vehicles. Song Rui spoke, saying that they had arrived at Hucheng, the capital where the headquarters of Burning Blood was located. Immediately, our protagonist asked about the ranks and how they were determined, pointing to the soldier beside him and even calling him weak. The soldier could only scratch his head and force a smile, saying he could at least take punches. But our protagonist asked if he would also join the evaluation. Song Rui explained that he already belonged to the logistics team, not the combat team, so he didn't need an evaluation. But the soldier suddenly interjected, saying that the logistics team also fought, and one day, they might need him too. Song Rui continued explaining that since they had plenty of time, she would tell him what she knew. People with special abilities were called warriors, ranked from S to E. The headquarters, Special Response Unit had its own rating system. The main criteria were physical strength and endurance. Likewise, the monsters they fought were divided into 5 levels based on the danger they posed. She laid out that each warrior rank corresponded to a specific class of monster. She also mentioned the Beast Core, which immediately confused our protagonist. Yan Hao explained that humans only awaken special abilities when interacting with a Beast Core. He added that talent, luck, and physical condition affected affinity, and if it was high, one could gain multiple abilities. But if you absorbed only a single core, you could only reach rank E. Suddenly, the vehicle stopped. A guard blocked the convoy and said the road was closed, forcing them to turn. Song Rui grew annoyed and asked why they were blocking the special response unit. On the side, a luxurious car with a strange symbol on its door caught the captain's attention. She wondered why someone from the Green Vine group was there and felt uneasy. An hour later, they finally arrived at the evaluation site of Burning Blood, where many new recruits had already gathered. The head examiner, Lin Yongxin, came out and introduced himself. He declared that no matter what their pasts were, here they had to follow the rules. He strictly warned that he would not tolerate cheating, and the weak would surely not pass. He then announced that the first test was the physical assessment and signaled everyone to begin. In the first part, our protagonist ran 100 meters while carrying 50 kilos, finishing in just 5.10 seconds. In the strength test with electromagnetic dumbbells, other recruits struggled to lift the weight, but he effortlessly raised 500 kilos with one hand, shocking everyone. Next came the striking power test. With a powerful punch to the machine that measured force, his blow was so strong it broke the machine, which only displayed an error message, unable to calculate the result. 10 minutes later, he approached the examiner and said he had completed all the challenges. The examiner confirmed it and announced that our protagonist's total score was 198. All the recruits were stunned, as the previous highest record was only 140. Some doubted him and asked if he had cheated. One staff member even reminded instructor Lin that the record for newcomers was just 140. At that moment, Zheng Jin, the captain's brother from Chishi, suddenly appeared, saying he didn't believe our protagonist's results. The examiner grew annoyed, saying he had personally supervised the test and even had a recording, asking if Zheng Jin was accusing him. Zheng Jin backed down, pretending he was only curious, but his smile hinted at ulterior motives. He even approached our protagonist and asked if he was Yan Hao from the Chishi City Patrol team. He claimed he only wanted to greet him since they were from the same place. But in his mind, He still vividly remembered his brother's humiliation and vowed to make our protagonist pay tenfold. Quietly, our protagonist observed him leave, pondering his comment about them being from the same city. The examiner then explained further, introducing Jung Jin as one of the rich sons from the Chishi defense team, and asked if he knew him. Our protagonist replied no. At that moment, he fully realized how rotten the city's entire defense system was. Finally, the examiner announced the results of the physical test, listing the ranks of several recruits, and declared that the first place went to Yan Hao, who scored 198 points. A blonde-haired woman smiled, thinking she had only come to the assessment for fun, but she couldn't believe there was such a strong newcomer this year. She grew interested in our protagonist and decided she would study how to get closer to him. Her name was Jin Ying, a senior researcher of the Technical Intelligence Bureau. Inside a dorm room, we see Jung Jin alone, sitting with a tablet in front of him where he is speaking to someone. Annoyed, he said that he should have gotten first place in the previous test. Angrily, he complained that two monsters suddenly appeared and ruined his plan. The person on the tablet shouted at him, saying that if he weren't the brother of the dog from the Green Vine group, would he even be qualified for the assessment? He was warned that he had only one chance, so he should not waste it. With a serious face, he clenched his fist tightly and decided, he must get into the burning blood core, for the sake of his brother. The scene shifted to the Beast Core testing station, where the recruits were lined up, including our protagonist. The instructor explained how the next test would proceed. Each one must wear a special wrist guard and then insert the core. Once activated, the device would light up and the evaluation would begin. The instructor warned that if the affinity result fell below 40%, it would be an automatic failure. He also briefly explained what a beast core was. He said that only high-level monsters could produce it, and the quality of the core depended on the strength of the creature that left it behind. Each core could grant different types of abilities, from elemental to support skills. However, he clarified that the wrist guard they were using now was the weakest one, only for testing affinity, and did not grant real abilities. After the explanation, the instructor seriously announced that the affinity test would begin. The first recruit stepped up and took the test. Unfortunately, the result was only 39%. He collapsed to the ground in despair, shouting that he had even placed fifth in the physical test, so he could not understand why he failed. Next came another candidate who got 56%. The man shouted with joy, almost crying with happiness that he could now join the Blazing Blood. After that, Jung Jin's name was called. He walked to the testing platform, his red eyes gleaming. He took the core, put on the wrist guard, and inserted the gem into the device. With an angry expression, he shouted at the core to obey him. From his body spread a red aura. The result came out. 60% affinity. That meant he was a D-rank warrior. The other recruits were shocked because the highest until then had only been 56%. With an arrogant grin, he called everyone trash, proudly declaring that he was the strongest among them all. Meanwhile, our protagonist calmly observed Jung Jin as he walked away. Soon after, Jin Ying approached. She asked him if he was from Chishi City. How could that be, since she had never heard of someone strong like him before? She introduced herself as the know-it-all of the intelligence agency. She even praised him, saying it was impressive that he had slipped past their radar. She directly asked him about the incident of the crimson fog that had spread in Chishi City the other day. Our protagonist pretended not to know what she was talking about. Jin Ying only smiled and said it was fine, that she was simply very interested in him. As she leapt away, she smiled meaningfully. Our protagonist seized the opportunity to ask for information. He called her Miss Know-It-All and asked if he could request some information. The girl smiled and winked, saying she would help him but under one condition: he needed to score higher than her. If that happened, she was willing to give him any information he wanted. Just then, the instructor called the girl's name for her turn. She walked to the platform energetically, her confidence evident. When she reached the center, she asked everyone to pay close attention to what she was about to do. She even boasted that she, as a woman, would break Zhang Jin's record. When the protagonist heard this, he wondered if she really was that strong. But beside him, Zhang Jin smirked and called Jin Ying a pathetic clown. The girl only smiled, pointed at herself as if declaring she was the best, put on the wrist guard, twirled the core slightly in the air, and quickly placed it into the wrist. Then, with boldness, she declared for them to watch her. The result came out. 78% affinity. Everyone was shocked. The recruits could not believe it, while the girl, smiling with a thumbs up, was overjoyed at her victory. She surpassed Zhang Jin's record and even proudly mocked him. On the side, Zhang Jin seethed with rage, unable to accept what had happened. After that, the instructor called the final candidate, our protagonist. The girl immediately teased him, asking if he could feel the pressure. In our protagonist's mind, he realized she was not bluffing, she truly was strong. He walked to the platform calmly, thinking to himself that they should just watch. He knew he needed to win here to get information about Xiao Shu. He remembered what Song Rui had said, that his rank would not be lower than C. He also noticed that the core he held was black, the same as the one he had absorbed before. With a confident smile, he put on the wrist guard and activated the device. He raised his arm, ready to see his true potential. The first result appeared. C rank warrior. The recruits were stunned. One of them even commented that that level was already fit for a squad leader. But suddenly, the display on the screen changed. It showed a system error. Everyone was confused, as it had never happened before. And to everyone's shock, the final result appeared. 0% affinity. Everyone was stunned, especially our protagonist. He could not understand what had happened. Zhang Jin started laughing and called him a big loser, mocking him that even the beast core rejected him. Our protagonist only had a serious expression. At that moment, he looked at his wrist and noticed something strange, feeling that there was something wrong with the device. The wrist guard began to emit a red aura, and the beast core was directly absorbed into his body. His eyes flashed red as he realized what was happening. His body was forcibly absorbing the core. The blonde woman ran to the computer, unable to believe the result. She shouted that this had never happened before, the lowest they had seen in the past was 1%. But with a smile full of joy, she said she needed to record it, adding that her old man would surely be happy with the news. Meanwhile, Zhang Jin smirked maliciously from the side. It seemed that he had also noticed the strange occurrence with the beast core. He told the instructor that the core had disappeared from the hands of our protagonist, shouting that Yan Hao had stolen the test item. The instructor angrily shouted that the test had malfunctioned and demanded to see the equipment. He ordered our protagonist to raise his hand for inspection. The man was shocked when he saw the wrist guard was empty. He asked where the beast core that should have been there had gone. With hesitation on his face, our protagonist raised his hand and said he had no idea what happened and that the situation was very strange. In his mind, he knew he needed to come up with an excuse quickly, or else he might become an experiment. He decided to gamble everything and pretend that the ongoing transformation was an ability from the core that had vanished. Suddenly, red energy burst from his body, and his arm transformed into a terrifying beast claw. Zhang's eyes widened in disbelief. He asked what kind of thing that was. The instructor immediately drew a knife glowing with purple energy, shouting for everyone to step back and enter high alert due to the transformation. But Jin Ying only grew more excited, her eyes sparkling as she asked if this was what they called beastification. While the instructor remained on guard, he ordered everyone to retreat. Meanwhile, Zhang Jin wondered in his mind if this was truly beastification and if he had been infected. The instructor quickly analyzed the situation, thinking the only option was to take him down. But Jin Ying shouted and tried to speak to our protagonist, calling his name and asking if he could still hear her. Our protagonist turned to her, clearly still in his right mind, and asked what the problem was. The instructor was shocked that he had not lost himself. The man asked if he really had not gone insane. The young man returned to his normal form and made up a story, saying it was an ability from the core that had entered his body on its own. Jin Ying happily grabbed his arm and said he was not insane, but instead had a transformation ability. The instructor smiled and said he was very lucky, explaining that the ability to return from transformation was an extremely rare power. Our protagonist asked who the woman really was and how she knew such things. The woman posed, winked, and said she had told him before. She was just a simple know-it-all, smiling all the while. The instructor then introduced her as Jin Ying, a blazing blood candidate for this term, and that her father was the head of the Technical Intelligence Bureau, the senior general Jin Ancheng, who oversaw the buying tech department. Jin Ying became annoyed with instructor Lin and shouted at him that such information was classified, saying he had completely ruined her mysterious aura. The instructor smiled and said the game was over. He reached out his hand and ordered our protagonist to hand over the core. With an awkward expression, our protagonist scratched his head and explained that it was not because he did not want to give it, but because it was now attached to his body and could not be removed. Zhang Jin's eyes widened in frustration, unable to believe that the beast core had really entered his body. He thought to himself that our protagonist was a perfect test subject and that he needed to report this to their group. The scene shifted to a sign reading, Radiology Room. Our protagonist was being prepared to undergo examinations to understand what had happened. Inside the room, he lay on the scanning machine. The doctors were shocked at the results on the monitor. They saw that the core had fully fused into his body and could no longer be removed. At that moment, Jin Ying arrived with her father. One of the doctors asked Director Jin for his opinion. The director replied that the young man should be carefully studied, as he was sure he still held many secrets. Shortly after, two men in uniform entered the room. One of them asked the director about the situation and the origin of our protagonist. The director smiled oddly and complained about the blazing blood corpse policy, calling it ridiculous that they still followed the 40% affinity rule. But he was interrupted by the white-haired man, who told him to cut the drama and ordered him to explain what was happening. This man was Song Lian, chief of the general staff of the Special Response Unit. The director explained that he had led the team that created the machine, so he was more certain than anyone that the zero result was not true. His daughter pulled him, scolded him, and told him to reveal the truth because the suspense was getting boring. With a somewhat mad smile, he revealed that the machine was simply broken. He added that the affinity of our protagonist had never been seen before, saying that the young man had surpassed the theoretical maximum of 100%. Upon hearing this, Song Lian's expression turned serious. He immediately called for the instructor and ordered him to follow him out of the room. Meanwhile, our protagonist was still lying inside the machine. He noticed that the core in his chest was changing from black to red. He remembered that absorbing a strong core earlier had activated the crystal. This time, even a weak core further strengthened the thing inside his body. The purity of the crystal increased and turned bright red. The total storage capacity of the crimson fog rose. The efficiency of absorbing crimson fog also increased. In other words, the stronger the beast, the greater the chance he could absorb them. He realized that he could evolve endlessly if he continued like this. The scene shifts to the headquarters of the Special Response Unit, Blazing Blood. Song Rui angrily says that he is the one who brought the protagonist here. He asks what the problem is if he joins his squad. His father calmly replies, telling him to fix his status and his tone. Then he asks if he has been playing too much and giving attention to AC rank rookie. Song Rui explains that he promised to include him in his group. He says not to make him a soldier who does not keep his promises. His father answers, a soldier's word is for the country, not for one person. He adds that the protagonist is already a member of the Yongxin team, and that cannot be changed. As a fellow Blazing Blood squad leader, does he want to fight for this just to recruit him? He orders his son to return to his post, and that is an order. Song Rui reluctantly agrees, thinking to himself that he will find another way. The scene shifts to the Blazing Blood barracks, where Jin Ying shouts the name of the protagonist. He says there is a big announcement. While raising a paper, he happily announces that a newly discovered nest between Lake City and Redstone City is sending rookie Blazing Blood members for their group. He also informs them that he submitted an application to Instructor Lim for their group. Our protagonist, Yang Hao, who is AC rank, is now officially a member of the Special Response Unit of Blazing Blood, in Lin Yongxing's squad. The protagonist is shocked at the news. A few hours later, they head to Instructor Lim's office. He explains that their mission is to investigate and assess the level of threat. Stay alert. Even though it is a low-level monster nest, it may change due to the red smoke. Jing Ying then tries to act cute while boasting that data collection is his greatest trait, so the protagonist should not worry, he will handle it. The scene shifts again, as the protagonist travels aboard the armored car. Jin Ying explains that the threat levels of monster nests are divided into 4: weak, moderate, strong, and extremely strong. There are also different types such as moderate strength. The low-level nest they are heading to is a kingdom of bees. Its structure is simple, but the internal pathways are complicated. And the most dangerous part is the massive swarm of stinger bees composed of many worker bees and a small number of soldier bees. Hearing this, the protagonist asks if one person really cannot handle the bee nest. Is it really necessary to bring 3 vehicles full of people? Jin Ying answers. These are iron bees, not small honeybees. Suddenly, the soldier driving their vehicle freezes and says something is blocking their way. When the protagonist looks out the window, he sees things flying in the sky, giant bees with glowing red eyes. He shouts, asking if bees are really this big. Jin Ying tells him that he already said earlier. These are iron bees, not honeybees. The driver quickly maneuvers and tells everyone to hold on tight. At that moment, the bees release their stings. Seeing this, Jing Ying shouts that this is not good because iron bees attack using their stingers, and their vehicle's armor cannot withstand it. At that moment, the protagonist shouts. He will fight the bees outside. He thinks this is the perfect chance to test his newly formed move. Holding the car door, it gradually begins to change. Moments later, he steps out of the vehicle with monstrous hands. He yells at his companions to find cover and defend themselves. He will be back. He begins attacking the giant bees using his transformed arms. The driver is shocked and asks what kind of ability that is, as he managed to turn the car door into a weapon. Smiling, Jin Ying says that it is a transformation skill. He adds that during the assessment, the protagonist managed to absorb a beast core. At first, he thought the protagonist could only transform himself. He did not expect that he could also use objects for his transformation skill. This means he can turn anything into a weapon. He takes out his notepad, saying this is astonishing and that he must record the battle data. He needs to study it when they return. As the protagonist continues fighting, suddenly a green light shoots directly at him. It pierces through his created weapon, and he wonders what that green thing was that broke through. He realizes that attack is stronger than an iron bee's stinger, capable of breaking his defense. Without hesitation, he shouts to his companions that there are more enemies. He does not know where the attack came from. He warns Jing Ying and the others again to be careful and find a safe hiding spot. The group hides beside a large rock, but one soldier wearing fire protective gear opposes Jing Ying. Arrogantly, he says that iron bees are afraid of fire. Jing Ying warns him not to go out, but he still runs, until the green light strikes him. It directly hits the tank on his back, causing a huge explosion, and he burns alive. The protagonist continues battling the giant bees and asks Jing Ying where the green stings are coming from. Looking at his tablet, Jing Ying explains that it is from a hound-class queen bee. Its stinger has poison capable of piercing armor below C rank. The protagonist shouts in disbelief if such a monster really exists here. The one who investigated this area must have made a mistake because this is not a low-level nest. Hearing this, the protagonist tells Jing Ying to help him fight the scout-class bees, and he will take care of the queen bee. Jing Ying immediately agrees. He releases a surge of energy from his body, gradually gathering it into his hands, then shouts, "Storm!" He unleashes sharp winds that strike the monsters one by one, creating a path toward the queen. Seeing this, the protagonist's eyes glow blue. He thinks he has caught it now. A gigantic queen bee with 3 glowing red eyes appears before him. As his eyes shine, he removes the weapon attached to his hands and slowly wraps it like paper until it forms into a sharp spear. He raises it and tells himself that its shape will handle the rest. Then, he stomps the ground hard, shattering it, takes his stance, and hurls the spear surrounded by a crimson aura straight at the queen bee. The queen of the bees could no longer react to the attack and was immediately struck in the abdomen, the protagonist's weapon almost piercing through. When Jing Ying saw this, she could hardly believe that the protagonist had directly hit the queen's vital point. But it was still not completely defeated. Jing Ying even questioned how it gained such power, since it was only a hound class. She thought maybe it was not, but before she could finish her thought, she immediately shouted at the protagonist not to let it escape. However, the protagonist was already close to collapsing from exhaustion after his attack. As the bees escaped with their queen, Jing Ying shouted that the queen would evolve into an overlord class. The protagonist simply lay down and said to let it go, since he had no strength left. He also thought that if he did not obtain any crimson fog, his energy would be quickly depleted. He still needed to save enough energy for the bee queen. With her hands on her waist and smiling, Jing Ying asked the protagonist what he was doing. Was he trying to score low? She told him not to say he needed a girl like her to save him. The protagonist quickly got up and said he was not interested in little girls. Jing Ying became angry and asked who he was calling a little girl. Jing Ying handed him a chocolate bar and told him to eat it and rest for a while. But the protagonist refused and said he was not hungry. Suddenly, a group of soldiers arrived and asked if they were all right. The protagonist answered that they were fine. He added that they should clean up the area, set up a temporary defensive position, and report this immediately. Jing Ying then said she had already reported it. After they had set up, Jing Ying stood on top of the vehicle while watching the hive of the bees. Using a device that detected crimson fog, she said the readings were too low, so they could enter the hive if they wore protective suits. The protagonist then asked if they would not wait for backup. Jing Ying replied that the bee queen was already injured, so this was their chance to gather data and finish it. Moreover, the threat level of this mission had been raised from medium to high. If they could complete this mission above their current rank, imagine the benefits they would gain. The scene shifted to the Special Response Unit headquarters, inside the office of the Chief of Staff. Song Rui's father told the officer that the higher-ups were currently divided. It was not only their group that wanted to develop the protagonist into a high-tier asset. There was also a group of mad scientists who wanted to use him as a test subject. Since the protagonist was special, he ordered the officer not to take his eyes off him. Suddenly, the officer's transmission device rang. When Song Rui's father noticed it, he ordered him to attend to it immediately. The officer agreed. When he answered the call, he almost shouted in disbelief because the threat level of Yan Hao's group's mission had been raised from weak to strong. He even asked his caller if the protagonist and Jing Ying were already inside. When Song Rui's father heard this, he said that Jing Ying might be arrogant, but she was meticulous. She would not issue such a report so easily. He thought something strange was going on. Then, he ordered the officer to dispatch the nearest Blazing Blood unit as support, led by Song Rui, and mobilize them immediately. Their primary objective was to ensure the safety of Jing Ying and Yan Hao. Their secondary objective was to eliminate the beast hives. Suddenly, another officer appeared behind them and reported. The high-ranking officer asked Yongji if he was not supposed to still be in the hospital. Song Rui's father then asked Yongji if he had any objections to having his younger brother continue serving under Song Rui. He ordered him to report to Captain Song Rui immediately and serve as his assistant. He added that this was an order. Officer Lin agreed. Another officer then wondered and asked Song Rui's father if he had also arranged for this person to be assigned to Song Rui before. Song Rui's father did not answer and simply turned away, dismissing them. He thought to himself that he did not know why his son cared so much about the protagonist. But this was the only thing a father could do for his son. The story then returned to the place where the protagonist and Jing Ying were already wearing their protective suits. The protagonist thought that, as members of Blazing Blood, only he and Jingying had the ability to endure crimson fog even with protective combat suits. He expected it to be easy. Before they could enter the hive of bees surrounded by red mist, Jingying said that the energy readings on her device had not changed much. However, once the bee queen evolved into overlord class, clearing the hive would become extremely difficult. The protagonist suddenly ordered her to stop, and moments later, the enormous bee queen appeared, furious and with eyes almost blazing red. Jingying cursed at the sight, realizing that the mutated iron armor poison stinger queen had fully evolved. Judging by its size and the length of its stinger, it was already comparable to an overlord class. She even shouted that it had truly evolved. She wondered how this was possible, since the crimson fog concentration here was far too low to support rapid evolution. Moreover, it was not only the queen that had evolved, even the poisonous stinger bee class had become stronger. Jingying grew frustrated as she looked at her device, saying the crimson fog concentration here was really far below the threat level. She even wondered why her device was not detecting it. Suddenly, Jingying weakened, fell to her knees, and coughed. This worried the protagonist, who turned to look at her. While kneeling, Jingying suspected that someone had tampered with their protective suit, as its effect against crimson fog seemed weakened. She thought there was a flaw in blazing blood. All at once, the bees attacked, unleashing sharp red stingers. Seeing this, the protagonist quickly pulled Jingying and told her to retreat. As they ran, he smirked, thinking that while he was running pointlessly, a fresh supply of crimson fog was being served to him on a silver platter. But first, he needed to get Jingying to safety. He could not focus on the battle while distracted. He forcefully kicked down a wall, and they entered a large space. The protagonist told Jingying to hide there, as it was a safe and ventilated spot. He also told her to contact headquarters and inform the reinforcements to bring proper protective suits. He added that he would handle the enemy. Jingying agreed, saluted him, and said she would update them with all the data from inside and the latest situation. Before the protagonist faced the giant bees, Jingying called out to him and warned that if he did not return, she would find him even in hell. The protagonist only smiled and told her not to worry, because he would come back. He then walked toward his enemy, the queen bee. He thought to himself that finally, he had the power to protect the people he cared about. As he stood surrounded by giant bees, including the overlord class mutated iron armor poison stinger queen, he said in his heart that today, once again, he had made a promise, just like the one he made to his sister Xiaoshui. He raised his hand, gathering a ball of red energy, challenged his enemy, and declared that he would not fail. As he continued gathering energy in his hand, he thought that this was his only remaining chance. There was still enough crimson fog for one last strike, so he had to be careful. First, he needed to focus, combine it, and gather it all to the very end. In his mind, he kept repeating that he had to unleash it at the right moment. Once again, he stretched out his hand upward and shouted with all his might his skill, Crimson Brush. A powerful surge of crimson energy burst from his hand. It struck directly at the bees above, and at the same time, there was a huge explosion. Flames and energy erupted like blazing lightning in the sky, and the very hive of the bees was pierced by the energy. As the smoke slowly faded, he looked around and wondered if what he did worked. But to his shock, instead of decreasing, the crimson fog around him grew even denser. When he looked up, his face turned pale, the countless bees were barely harmed. To himself, he weakly muttered, "No, this can't be." Meanwhile, 3 minutes before the battle, Jingying was busy repairing her device. She studied its readings and noticed that someone had tampered with it earlier. Once the device was finally fixed, it could once again properly measure the concentration of crimson fog. Her eyes widened. The device gave a severe alarm. The concentration of crimson fog had already exceeded the limit. She immediately grew anxious. In her mind, it shouldn't be this high. Why was the reading nearly double? Before she could continue analyzing, a strong gust of wind suddenly hit around her. She moved closer to a small opening and saw where the noise was coming from. She saw a powerful explosion from outside. She thought to herself that this was bad. Because that explosion had definitely stirred the crimson fog, making it even denser. And if it became denser, the bee swarms would absorb it even faster. If that happened, even the weakest scout class would immediately evolve into stronger types like the hound class. Meanwhile, the protagonist was still fighting the bees. For every one he struck down, two replaced it. He cursed as his enemies kept multiplying. He could feel that even if he used all of the crimson fog, it was depleting faster than he could recover. At this rate, he would dry up and lose all strength if he continued. As Jing Ying observed, she watched the protagonist's neck. There, she noticed it, clear signs of crimson fog corruption. On top of that, it was obvious that his protective suit had been tampered with. The device continued to ring an alarm. Jing Ying grew restless. She thought that if this continued, the protagonist would lose control and be completely consumed by the crimson fog. Because of this, she quickly gathered energy in her hand. She told herself that she had to remove the crimson fog around the protagonist even if it stopped the fight. She released her skill, a wind pressure bullet aimed directly at the protagonist's position. Right after, she pointed her finger like pressing a button and shouted, "Detonate." The protagonist was startled. He suddenly noticed an energy orb appear right where he stood. Before he could react, he cursed. In his mind, he thought, "Who did this?" He was greatly dismayed because his source of energy was cut off. At the same moment, the bees attacked again. They released green spikes and fired them at him all at once. He immediately used his transformed arms to block them. But 4 spikes struck him. He instantly felt the effect. The poison carried a paralyzing effect. While he was momentarily distracted, suddenly an attack came from behind. He knew he couldn't dodge it. He thought this was the end. But before he was struck, a soldier suddenly appeared. The soldier took the blow for him, the attack piercing his back instead. The protagonist's eyes widened in recognition. "Professor Lin," he shouted. Furiously, Lin answered, "The battle isn't over. Focus." As the bees surged again, a burst of powerful violet energy suddenly erupted from another direction. One after another, bees fell. The protagonist looked and saw Song Rui. He immediately asked, "Why are you here?" Song Rui answered directly, "Headquarters ordered us to provide support." At the same time, he shouted to all the troops, "Clear out the insects." All the soldiers immediately responded. They rushed forward, wielding their fire-protected weapons. And there, the fierce counterattack against the bees began. Song Rui ordered his men in Group A to unleash super heat in the front to surprise the enemy. After that, he ordered Group B to cover with fire in the middle. He also told Lieutenant Lim to retreat. The protagonist retreated with them to regroup. Lieutenant Lim immediately responded and they ran back. Suddenly, the queen wasp prepared and the tip of its stinger began to glow. Moments later, it released a red laser beam directly toward the protagonist and Lieutenant Lim. Seeing this, a soldier shouted at the two. But Song Rui told them not to look back, not to stop, and to keep running while he prepared his weapon. He thought to himself if this was a dominator class wasp. He had no other choice. He immediately released the energy he had gathered in his weapon and called it electromagnetic annihilation. His attack was wrapped in powerful lightning and directly struck the queen wasp's attack. Song Rui thought to himself that this technique generates a high-voltage electromagnetic field that can destroy and paralyze everything within its blast range. His attack managed to nullify the queen's attack. After the explosion, blue lightning spread and directly struck the queen wasp. A soldier shouted in awe after seeing their captain's attack and realized that this was the dominator class queen wasp that Jing Ying had reported in his intel. Another soldier shouted that it looked like it was trying to escape. But Song Rui shouted that it was already paralyzed and could not escape. He ordered everyone to clean up the swarm and prioritize the rescue. Everyone immediately agreed. The protagonist glanced back slightly and said that he had no idea Song Rui was this strong. Lieutenant Lim said that back in Redstone City, he hadn't brought his battle equipment and combat armor, so this was probably not even his full strength. While the soldiers were busy burning the wasps, Song Rui approached the protagonist and asked where Jing Ying was. The protagonist quickly pointed to where she was. Suddenly, Jing Ying came out and called Song Rui, Ice Queen, angrily saying that 10 minutes more and she would have taken her corpse instead. Song Rui told her not to forget to get treatment and that she still owed her for the last time she had saved her. Lieutenant Lim said that their primary objective had been completed, the wounded had been rescued. He asked what the next orders were. Song Rui answered, eliminate the swarm and remove the threat of the nest. Meanwhile, while they were busy talking, the protagonist secretly slipped away behind them, thinking that he would use the opportunity to gather Crimson Fog energy again. The last Crimson Fog cannon blast hadn't finished off the Queen Wasp, so he needed to try again. He slowly absorbed the Crimson Fog around him and sighed as he felt it was almost completely filled. But suddenly, he froze and turned when he heard something. Even Song Rui's group could not believe what they saw. The Queen Wasp was not completely defeated and began gathering strength again. Jing Ying shouted that it was absorbing all the Crimson Fog in the nest, and added that it was evolving again. She couldn't believe it and asked if it had become an Overlord class. Her device suddenly gave a warning that the Crimson Fog had already exceeded level 4. Jing Ying asked where that fog came from. Could it be that this nest was high level? The Queen let out a loud roar and Hound-class wasps began emerging again behind them. When Lieutenant Lim saw this, he quickly warned Captain Song Rui that the wasps were appearing behind them. The protagonist quickly jumped and said they could handle the wasps and he would finish the Queen. Song Rui shouted and ordered everyone to continue assisting. Lieutenant Lim replied that he understood. As the protagonist jumped quickly upward toward the Queen, he thought about how he would finish it immediately. Using his transformed hand, he began slashing the Queen repeatedly. Then, he stepped back slightly and gathered red energy into his hand. He thought it wasn't enough to rely only on his claws. He immediately threw the ball of red energy toward the Queen and shouted Scarlet Condensing Blast. It caused a massive explosion and he immediately fell to the ground. He wondered if it worked. But before the smoke cleared, the Queen launched a sharp projectile toward him, which he barely dodged. He thought that he needed to find a suitable weapon. He paused slightly when he saw the Queen's stinger stuck on the ground. He quickly grabbed it and used his beastification bind. It transformed into a massive sword. As the Queen continued to attack, he quickly dodged each strike. He faced one attack head-on and slashed it with the sword. He gathered all his Crimson Fog energy. He was in the air, above the Queen, right in front of its head. He thought, since this weapon was given to him, he would return the favor. His sword and his eyes glowed with red energy. He shouted Red Mist Slash. He swung the sword with great force, splitting the Queen Wasp in half. It exploded violently and its body parts scattered everywhere. As the smoke slowly cleared, a red crystal appeared in the air, glowing brightly. As he looked at it, he thought that it was a Dominator class beast core. He immediately grabbed it and said that he would take it. But suddenly, the crystal shone on his chest and a tremendous red energy burst out through his whole body. He felt its weight. He thought that the energy of that power was immense. His crystal core instantly filled and he could barely endure the overflowing energy. Meanwhile, in Song Rui's group, they continued slaughtering the wasps. They managed to eliminate them all. Jing Ying even wondered why the wasps suddenly weakened. Song Rui ordered everyone to go and support the protagonist. But when they turned, they were shocked to see the protagonist collapsed on the ground. Song Rui immediately shouted, calling out his name. Yin Ling immediately examined the protagonist lying on the ground. She said he had been too exposed to the Crimson Fog and might lose himself. When Song Rui heard this, he immediately ordered Lieutenant Lim to deploy a mobile medical pad, and block the neural transmission. Lieutenant Lim immediately agreed. They returned to the temporary camp beast-type perimeter and placed the protagonist in the mobile medical pad. A worried soldier asked how the protagonist was. Lieutenant Lim replied that he was stable for now. Song Rui then told Jing Ling that as the tech officer, she should adjust and monitor the parameters of the medical pad. When they had properly laid the protagonist inside it, they immediately closed it and anesthesia was administered. Jing Ying said this was only temporary and that they needed to return to headquarters immediately. Meanwhile, inside the protagonist's consciousness, he was being strangled by one of his personas whose whole body had already transformed. It told him to surrender his body and embrace beastification. But in the protagonist's mind, he remembered his parents, crying and bloody when the world began to change. He also remembered his sister's face crying, as red veins slowly appeared on her face. He wondered in his mind if he was about to die. He apologized to his parents and to his sister. He even said that everything was over, and he was almost losing hope. But suddenly, his father appeared before him, telling him to take care of his sister. Meanwhile, his mother told him he had to live. His sister also appeared and begged him to promise that he would return safely. The protagonist thought that his sister was still waiting for him. Next, the people around him appeared, the soldiers who told him that he was a warrior and that this fight was not yet over. He needed to focus, and they trusted that he could do it. One even said he would not allow him to give up. Others urged him to wake up. He shouted loudly as he thought that everyone was waiting for him and that this was not over yet. He had to survive. From his back, chains began to emerge and bound the persona that had been strangling him earlier. He declared in his mind that he had to find Xiaoshu and protect everyone he cherished. He would not fall here. This was not his duty alone. While pointing seriously at his other persona, he said that it was also its duty to fight. After that, he began absorbing its crimson fog while it was bound in midair. In his mind, he said it should return because everyone was waiting for them. Smiling, he looked at the transformed crystal in his chest and chuckled slightly, asking if this was the price of being strong. With every breakthrough, he felt like he was dancing on the edge of a cliff. After all this, he wondered in his consciousness why he still could not open his eyes and could not move. Meanwhile, while the armored vehicles were heading back to headquarters, suddenly a strong whirlwind appeared around them. A sandstorm made it difficult for them to drive. The soldier driving shouted that the sandstorm was too thick, he could not see the road, and it was too dangerous to drive. Lieutenant Lim told Song Rui that there was an old ruined city just 3 minutes ahead. He asked if they should take shelter. Song Rui did not immediately answer and instead asked Jingying about the protagonist's status. While looking at her laptop, Jingying said his vitals were stable but he remained unconscious. Then Song Rui ordered Lieutenant Lim to head to the ruins and tell the accompanying vehicles to follow. They went straight to the ruins that Lieutenant Lim had mentioned, and as they entered a large abandoned building, Song Rui shouted for everyone to get out and regroup. But he noticed the surroundings and told Jingying that something seemed wrong with this place. He ordered her to check the structural stability, crimson fog density, and heat signatures. Jingying immediately complied. After that, Song Rui ordered the soldiers to protect the protagonist because he was the top priority of their headquarters. Meanwhile, some people were hiding and grinning, their eyes glowing red as they watched them. Moments later, they released many arrows coated with green liquid. Lieutenant Lim immediately went on alert and shouted to everyone that they were under attack and had to take cover. An arrow struck directly at him, but using his gear suit, he blocked it with his arm and activated hardening. Jingying noticed that the arrows contained poison from the wasps. Moments later, a strong explosion occurred and a large rock fell from above. Song Rui immediately shouted for everyone to take cover. He strongly kicked the medical pad containing the protagonist to push it away before the rock could fall. He quickly ran to avoid it. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Lim protected Jingying using his hardened armor. The attackers began to emerge and surrounded them. Their leader shouted not to let them escape and to take everything. The enemies began throwing bottles, and when they shattered, green smoke came out. Song Rui realized it was Dominator class beast liquid, a gas that causes paralysis. He immediately covered his nose. The enemy leader gave the signal to begin the attack and kill them all. Suddenly, a large man with an eye patch appeared in front of Song Rui. He even called her sweetheart and demanded goods. Song Rui ignored him and immediately attacked with a powerful kick charged with lightning. With such strength, the man was thrown against the wall, almost embedding into it. But suddenly, a chain struck directly at the medical pad and dragged it away. Song Rui hurriedly chased it, but because of the effect of the gas, he fell to the ground. The enemies were delighted as they pulled the chain attached to the medical pad. One even said that if it was being guarded so heavily, it must mean there was treasure inside. Jing Ying panicked as she tried to reach for the medical pad and shouted for them to stop. But suddenly, an arrow struck her leg and she screamed in pain. She fell to her knees and cried out the protagonist's name. Meanwhile, inside the medical pad where the protagonist was lying, a symbol began to glow on his body. When the bandits finally took the medical pad, Jing Ying told Song Rui that they needed to hurry to rescue the protagonist. Song Rui disagreed and told her to stay there and keep quiet. Holding the arrow that struck Jing Ying's leg, he thought about how he not only failed to protect the protagonist but also let Jing Ying get hurt. He blamed himself, feeling like a complete failure. He cut off the shaft of the arrow embedded in Jing Ying's leg, then slowly pulled it out and wrapped it with a bandage. He told Jing Ying not to move because that was all they could do for now. Jing Ying said that the thieves had set up an ambush even before they arrived and wondered how they knew their movements. Officer Lin came over, called Captain Song Rui, and reported that they had secured the area. Most of the thieves had fled after being poisoned. Song Rui said that there was a severe sandstorm outside, so they couldn't transfer the protagonist to the surface. He suspected that the target was underground. He pointed to an abandoned elevator shaft and suggested that it might be the entrance to the enemy's hideout. He immediately ordered all personnel to assemble. All units were to prepare for battle, and the objective was to rescue the protagonist. Team A was assigned to guard the exit and protect Jing Ying, while Officer Lin and Team B would go down with him. They had to succeed. Failure was not an option. All the soldiers agreed. One soldier stepped forward and pleaded with Captain Song Rui to let him come along. Song Rui refused, explaining that he wasn't a combatant and that they didn't know what was waiting below. He advised him to stay with Jing Ying and protect her with Team A. But the soldier shouted that the protagonist was his best friend who had once saved his life, and now that he was in danger, how could he just stay there? Song Rui allowed him to come but warned him to stay close and not fall behind. The soldier agreed. At the bandits' hideout, one man complained that the metal chest was too heavy and asked what was inside. Another replied that he didn't care, since if it was hidden in an armored vehicle, it must contain something valuable. A man wielding a huge axe came over and told them to move aside. He raised his weapon, his eyes flashing, and struck the medical pad with full force, but not even a scratch appeared. He was the leader of the raiders. He cursed, saying it was tougher than a bank vault and that they had already broken several crowbars and sledgehammers trying to open it, yet it hadn't budged. A young man volunteered, saying he could open it, but they would have to go underground. The leader got angry and asked what nonsense he was talking about, saying it was just a dead end down there and that the last 3 who went never came back. Others mocked him, saying he was dreaming and that even rats couldn't survive there. The young man said he had seen the key down there and asked if they wanted to make a bet. The leader immediately grabbed him by the neck and demanded who he thought he was. The young man replied that if he could open it, he should be allowed to leave, but if not, he could be killed anywhere the leader wanted. The leader nodded, saying if he tried anything funny, he would kill him instantly. Meanwhile, still lying inside the medical pad, the protagonist thought that he didn't know what had happened after he lost consciousness, but it seemed he was in the enemy's hideout. After the upgrade of his crystal core, he could feel that his sensory ability had become much stronger. He could sense not only his surroundings but even beneath the ground, as well as the state of his own body. Red notifications appeared, showing that his crystal core had reached the rust-red stage. His Crimson Fog reserve was at 67%, and his abilities had evolved. Beastification Claw, Beastification Entwine, with new abilities plundered, Crimson Fog Bullet and Poison Gland. The protagonist realized that the poison gland must have come from the Bee Queen. The raiders had already reached the bottom of the pit, where a giant dragon skeleton lay. The leader said that this was the place and warned the young man not to try anything foolish. The young man approached the skeleton, pointed to a sharp bone, and said that was the key. The leader ordered the box to be brought over, but before they could move it closer, the medical pad suddenly opened. As the dust cleared, someone shouted that the box had opened on its own. Before they could react, the protagonist used his poison gland. From his hand emerged a dark green smoke that quickly spread among the enemies. Watching the effect, he said it wasn't bad as a supportive skill for crowd control and seemed quite useful. The leader cursed and asked why there was a person inside, thinking that the protagonist had let himself be captured to infiltrate their hideout. The protagonist mocked them, saying they were a bunch of fools. The leader said he was a veteran warrior and that killing someone like him would be as easy as crushing an ant. He immediately attacked, shouting for the protagonist to go to hell. Before the strike landed, the protagonist activated his poison bean and punched the leader hard in the face, asking if that was all he had. The leader was sent flying, crashing into the wall so hard it almost broke. The young man beside them screamed, and the protagonist turned to look at him. With a terrifying smile and glowing red eyes, he asked if the young man wanted to try him. The young man couldn't respond and fainted. The protagonist noticed many aberrant skeletons around, all shattered and seemingly having killed one another. He realized that someone had deliberately thrown them all down there for a pit fight-like massacre. Looking up, he sensed Song Rui's electromagnetic signal about 10 floors above. He smiled faintly, crushed the sharp bone of the beast, and said that woman must be getting impatient as always. Above ground, the raider troops were exchanging gunfire with Song Rui's group. Officer Lin charged forward directly, even as bullets hit him. The enemies cursed, saying the man was bulletproof. As soon as Officer Lin closed the distance, he kicked one man in the face. After a while, a soldier reported to Captain Song Rui that they had secured the area but found no trace of the protagonist. Song Rui ordered them to continue searching. Officer Lin noticed the aberration claw marks nearby and thought there was a secret in that place. The soldier who was the protagonist's best friend told Captain Song Rui that according to Jing Ying's tracker, the protagonist was below, but the signal suddenly disappeared. Song Rui asked what was going on and realized the medical pad might have been damaged. Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist suddenly appeared before them, carrying the unconscious young man from earlier, asking if everyone was all right. Officer Lin asked the protagonist if he was all right. He answered that he was fine now. Song Rui asked what was down there. The protagonist replied that it looked like an abandoned beast fighting arena. Officer Lin asked Captain Song Rui if they should investigate it. He replied that their priority was to retreat. They would arrange an investigation later. When the protagonist's close friend noticed the boy he was carrying, he asked who he was. But before he could answer, the boy suddenly woke up, jumped down in front of him, and grabbed the weapon behind his back. He moved quickly, attempting to stab him while shouting for him to die. The attack hit the protagonist hard in the chest, but he used partial beastification, scale armor. The front part of the boy's knife shattered, and the protagonist immediately caught it with one hand. He completely crushed the weapon. The boy fell to his knees in fear as the protagonist asked if he was that desperate to die. The boy gritted his teeth in anger while being held by the neck. His eyes glowed red, and red veins appeared all over his body. He shouted furiously that they, the soldiers, were all bastards. In the protagonist's mind, these were symptoms of crimson fog infection. He struck the boy hard at the back of the neck, and the boy instantly collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The protagonist's close friend saw a photo fall beside the boy. He picked it up and recognized the people in it. The Chishi patrol team, 7th squad. Shwo. It was his comrade's ID. Song Rui came closer and said that the person in the photo looked older than him, but they resembled each other, so they might be brothers. He also noticed that the boy's condition was critical, so he suggested taking him back for treatment and questioning. The protagonist's friend immediately agreed. The protagonist thought that the infection had already passed the first stage. He placed his palm on the boy's back, thinking that if he could absorb the crimson fog energy in his body, he might be able to save him. The scene shifted to Hucheng, Special Response Unit, Blazing Blood Barracks. A guard reported that they had returned and told another guard to inform young Master Zhang. His companion replied yes and hurried off. Song Rui called Officer Lin and ordered him to bring Jing Ying to the medical bay immediately. He promptly replied, "Yes, sir." But suddenly, a hand blocked their way, asking what was going on. The man apologized to them both and said that according to the latest quarantine regulations, all personnel returning from high-risk Crimson Fog zones must immediately undergo quarantine inspection. The protagonist asked when this policy was implemented. The guard replied that it was an order from their superiors. He asked them to cooperate, undress, and undergo full disinfection and examination. Song Rui approached the guard, asking who exactly gave this supposed superior order. He was their commanding officer, Song Rui. He told the guard to have his superior report to him immediately. Before the guard could answer, Zhang Jin suddenly arrived, asking who was refusing to cooperate with the inspection. Seeing it was Captain Song, he assumed it was just a misunderstanding. He wondered why Song Rui had returned with the protagonist. Song Rui angrily asked if he was the one who ordered the logistics soldiers to do this. Zhang Jin explained that he was in charge of quarantine safety for the new soldiers. Captain Song and researcher Jin were veterans of the Special Response Unit, so of course, they didn't need to be checked. He further explained to the protagonist that this was for the safety of the entire barracks and asked for his cooperation. Song Rui shouted that there was no need, releasing a purple aura from his body as his eyes glowed. He demanded to know who Zhang Jin thought he was to give orders here. He was not the one in charge. Zhang Jin was left speechless in fear. The three of them continued walking, led by Song Rui, who told them to ignore him. But Zhang Jin still stopped them, pointing at the boy being carried by the protagonist's friend. He asked if they planned to bring that filthy creature into the barracks. The protagonist's friend replied that he was not a filthy creature, he was the brother of his fellow soldier. With a smirk, Zhang Jin said that he came from the patrol team. Trash should go to the garbage, so he ordered the guards to seize him. The protagonist's friend refused, but Zhang Jin asked if he was defying a direct order. Song Rui was about to speak, but the protagonist stopped him. He activated his poison gland and told Song Rui that he would handle this. The protagonist grabbed Zhang Jin by the shoulder and told him to stop. Zhang Jin asked if he was defying him, but then froze as he suddenly felt something strange in his body. He realized it was poison. He wondered when it happened. With a calm smile, the protagonist said that he knew Zhang Jin didn't like him, but his methods were too low. He advised him to step back while he still could. He told him to look at himself. Just a few words and he was already lying down. The protagonist called two guards and told them to take Zhang Jin back to rest. One guard approached his team leader, asking what happened. Zhang Jin thought to himself that the protagonist won this time. He would just wait. As they walked away, Song Rui asked what he had done. The protagonist answered that he shouldn't worry, Zhang Jin just wouldn't be able to stand for a few days. The scene shifted to the medical laboratory. Jing Ying said that her combat suit had been intentionally coated with a slow-acting corrosive agent. Its protective functions had failed after being exposed to a high concentration of crimson fog. Song Rui's father replied that there might be a mole who didn't want Jing Ying to return alive. He added that the protagonist was also one of the targets. The protagonist said he believed he was the main target, and Jing Ying was only caught up in it. Song Rui's father said that until everything was clear, both of them were suspended from all field missions. Jing Ying's father said that it seemed they had some pests to eliminate at headquarters. He hoped Song Rui's father could assign trustworthy people to protect his daughter and the protagonist. If anything else went wrong, both of them would be in danger. Song Rui's father replied that he understood. He told Song Rui that for now, his primary duty was to ensure their complete safety. Song Rui answered that he understood, father. A few days later, the protagonist sat and gazed up at the sky, thinking about the suspended field mission, the mole in the army, Zhang Jin from the city defense team, and Shuo from the patrol team. What should he do now? His thoughts were interrupted when his friend arrived and called him Brother Yen. The protagonist asked what was wrong, what happened. His friend whispered that while examining the boy, he found a picture. The woman in the photo looked like his sister. The protagonist shouted in shock, asking if he was sure. He gripped his friend's hand tightly, causing him to scream in pain and say that his arm was about to break. The protagonist and his friend immediately went to where the boy was. When they opened the door, his friend quickly asked the doctor, what was his condition. The doctor replied that his condition was stable for now, but he still needed to be observed. However, his infection had been extremely severe when he first arrived. The doctor wondered how it had suddenly subsided in the past few days. The protagonist approached the boy and extended his hand. The doctor noticed this and asked what he was doing. He replied, "Sorry, doctor. This is an Ember Blood internal investigation." He politely asked the doctor to step aside for a moment. The doctor said that he knew the protagonist was a raider, but the sudden disappearance of the infection symptoms was strange. Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist said that he knew. He thought to himself that he was the one who removed the crimson fog from the boy's body. While looking at the photo taken from the boy, he silently uttered in his mind the name of his sister, Xiao Shui. When the boy saw this, he asked the protagonist what he was doing. He said this is photo of his brother. The protagonist showed the picture to the boy, pointing at the woman in it, and asked where he had seen this woman. The boy answered, 6 months ago, at the refugee resettlement center. The protagonist asked where she was now. He replied that he didn't know. He didn't know. They were all gone. The red marks began to appear again on the boy's face as he struggled, shouting that even his brother. She promised to wait for him in the city. He promised he would come back soon. When the protagonist heard this, he remembered the promise he made to his own sister. His thoughts were interrupted when his friend said that Shuo was the one assigned to evacuate the refugees back then, but he was given another mission in the middle of the transfer and disappeared afterward. The protagonist was puzzled by his disappearance and asked why he was given another mission in the middle of his original duty. His friend replied that he was not sure either. They would need to check the mission files from that time for details. The protagonist placed his hand closer to the boy, and the crimson fog from the boy's body slowly transferred into his hand. When his friend saw this, he asked what he was doing. The protagonist signaled him to keep it a secret. In his friend's mind, that's why the infection suddenly healed. The protagonist told the boy that he would help him find his brother. But he needed to tell him everything he knew about himself and the woman in the photo, 6 months ago. The boy asked if he told him about the woman, would he really help him find his sister? As the protagonist handed the photo back to him, he said to try trusting him. The boy asked if he had done something to him. The protagonist replied that he believed it would benefit them both. The boy closed his eyes and agreed, explaining that it happened 6 months ago. The scene shifted to the base cafeteria. While they were eating, his friend asked if he was really going back. He answered, of course. Xiao Shui had been missing for more than half a year. He couldn't wait any longer. His friend asked, what about Captain Song? He said there was a mole in the military, someone who wanted to harm him. That's why he sent him to follow him and report any information. The protagonist answered seriously that he came here for Xiao Shui. Nothing would stop him. Suddenly, a voice behind him said, who said anyone would stop you? Song Rui and Jing Ying appeared behind him. When the protagonist's friend saw them, he asked Sister Jing if her leg had healed. She replied, yes. The Blazing Blood's medical tech was truly amazing. Song Rui invited everyone, saying this was not a good place to talk. The scene shifted to a small meeting room. The protagonist asked how they knew. Jing Ying showed a tablet displaying a video of the time he was talking to the boy. He was surprised and asked, there's surveillance. The protagonist's friend was also shocked and asked Sister Jing if she had been monitoring them. She replied not to make it sound bad. She was just protecting everyone. Smiling confidently, she said that in such chaos, it was possible for someone to be suddenly abducted, right? Song Rui said he was the one who asked Jingying to retrieve that surveillance footage. After the doctor left, she approached him and explained the situation. He added that he wouldn't stop the protagonist. He said he would help him. He hoped the protagonist would also try to trust him. The protagonist was surprised to hear this and called out Captain Song's name. Before he could finish speaking, Jingying suddenly held his arm and cheerfully said that she would also like him to show a little trust. Didn't he say he was investigating an incident? She had her own special way. His friend shouted that he would support him too. Song Rui then asked the protagonist what his plan was now. He told him to explain it clearly to everyone. The protagonist slightly lowered his head and said, "All right." The scene shifted again. Outside the ruins of Chishi City, a man stood at an entrance where someone asked him for the password. He answered, "Everywhere." After giving the correct response, he was allowed to enter. He immediately approached a seated man and said he had something important for Chief Hong. The man replied that Chief Hong had no time to speak with him. The man explained that it was about the protagonist. He was on his way to Chishi City from Huchang. Grinning, the man quickly called Chief Hong and said they had intel about the protagonist. The red-haired man smirked, thinking that the protagonist was finished. A few days later, at the outskirts checkpoint of Chishi City, people were shouting questions about what was happening and what they were doing. The guards blocked them, saying it was the city guard defense protocol. All incoming vehicles had to be inspected. They requested that everyone lower their windows for inspection. Meanwhile, in a luxurious vehicle where the protagonist group was riding, Song Rui wondered what the city guards were doing. The situation was already chaotic. The protagonist's friend said he had never seen them this active in defending the city before. The protagonist changed the topic, telling Song Rui that it was a nice car. He didn't know he had such taste. Song Rui replied that this wasn't a military mission, so they couldn't use a military vehicle. His personal car was more discreet. The protagonist's friend asked if it was alright to leave Sister Jing alone at headquarters. Song Rui replied that he had Officer Lin watching over her, so there shouldn't be any problem. The protagonist added that Jing Ying said she had her own way of helping with the investigation. He left her there because what she needed access to was only available at headquarters. Song Rui added that besides, Jing Ying could provide remote support through the military command. A guard approached their car and knocked on the window, saying, "Security check." But suddenly, another guard standing on a building shouted, pointing that an aberration was approaching, spotted 1 kilometer out. It was the Iron Ridge Wolf Pack. The guards cursed and ran in panic, shouting for everyone to retreat. Seeing this, Song Rui exclaimed that those bastards were just going to leave them here as a blockade. The protagonist got out of the car and said to let him handle it. The monsters chased the people on the streets, and one of them was almost bitten, screaming for help. Before the monster could devour him, the protagonist appeared behind it. He quickly attacked the monster using his transformed arm. With one swing of his hand, he managed to slash the monster at the neck, shocking the man. Standing before the other approaching monsters, he told the man that if he still wanted to live, he should run. The Scout-class Iron Ridge wolves gathered in front of him, showing their sharp fangs and glowing red eyes. The monsters began to move toward him. One jumped into the air, while most charged straight at him. At that moment, the protagonist said that this scene, he had seen it before. It felt so familiar. He remembered the past, when such monsters caused the death of his parents. As he walked forward, he killed the monsters one by one, saying he would never let it happen again. When the guard soldiers saw this, one shouted in shock, asking what kind of monster that man was. He wiped out the entire group of aberrations in an instant. Another immediately ordered, "Quick! Inform Captain Zhang. That man has arrived in Chishi City." One soldier replied, "Yes, sir," and ran off quickly. After the protagonist finished off all the monsters, he returned to their vehicle, proudly saying that it wasn't even difficult for him. His friend gave him a thumbs up and said, "You're amazing, truly a real Ember Blood warrior. Song Rui then said he would take care of the rest. He turned to the guard soldiers and shouted, "Hey, you there! Soldiers of the city defense team." A guard approached, and Song Rui showed his ID, introducing himself as Song Rui, squad leader of the Special Response Unit's Ember Blood Squad. He ordered them to immediately stop all inspections and allow civilians into the city. The guards quickly obeyed. Once they were inside, Song Rui said that the security check earlier seemed suspicious, as if there was another reason behind it. He asked the protagonist what he thought. The protagonist answered, "It looks like they're searching for someone. But for now, what's more important is to investigate a Shuo's mission file." A few moments later, they arrived at the Chishi City Defense Team headquarters. They immediately entered the archives. While searching, his friend said, "All the patrol team's mission files are here." But as the protagonist looked at the file he was holding, he said, "Not this one either. Why can't I find a Shuo's file?" Meanwhile, Song Rui was busy searching through the computer. The protagonist's friend said, "Wang Chang, Li Ming, all of them are gone. Even the basic roster was taken." The protagonist was shocked by what he heard. Song Rui added, "Even the local database was erased. There isn't a single record about a Shuo." The protagonist's friend asked, "So from the very start, there was never any record to begin with?" The protagonist asked if there was still another way. Song Rui said, "Wait a minute." He took his phone and called Jin Ying, asking if she could find out about it. Jin Ying replied, "Okay, just give me a little time." Song Rui explained that Jin Ying had a way to access the database files, but she would need time. The protagonist's friend was amazed and said, "Wow, Sister Jin is incredible." The protagonist said, "She calls herself Know-It-All." Song Rui agreed, "That's right. Captain Jia. He's a veteran from the old government army." The protagonist's friend added, "He's the one who trained Brother A Shuo when the patrol team was first formed. He must know about that mission." Song Rui then invited them to leave immediately. The scene shifted to Captain Jia's house. When they saw it messy and filled with broken objects, the protagonist's friend asked what happened there. The protagonist replied that there were signs of a fight. Song Rui noticed that the marks were fresh, meaning the battle had just ended. As the protagonist examined a small object, he said it was highly likely that the city defense team was responsible. Song Rui was surprised and asked, "Why would the city defense team go after Jia Jun?" The protagonist's friend explained, "Before, Brother Yan confronted Captain Zhang Shi of the city defense team and chained him in blood. It's clearly revenge." The protagonist said, "It seems all their actions are targeted at me. The inspection earlier was to make sure I entered the city." He added, "If that's the case, then let's face them head on." As they exited the building, two people approached them. One of them called out, "Officer Song," saying he finally found him. Song Rui asked who he was. He introduced himself as Officer Li Ben of the Chishi City Defense Team. He said he received a report that they were coming to Chishi City. He also explained that Captain Jia Jun of the patrol team under his command had gone missing during an outside mission, and he asked for their help in searching and rescuing him. Song Rui replied that it was their army's duty. Why would they help in the search? Li Ben explained that they didn't know what was happening, but aberration activity around the city had become strange, and their regular forces could no longer handle the fight. The protagonist looked at Song Rui. They exchanged glances and understood each other. Song Rui agreed to help with the search but added that Li Ben must accompany them. Upon hearing that, Li Ben said it wasn't a good idea. He was nervous and admitted that he might only get in their way. But Song Rui asked if he was refusing. It wasn't a request. It was an order. If he refused, he could be punished for insubordination. Li Ben froze and didn't dare say no. Song Rui immediately ordered, "Put him in the vehicle." The scene shifted to outside the city. The protagonist asked Li Ben, "Earlier you said aberration activity has been intense these past few days. If that's the case, why did you still send Captain Jia on that mission?" Don't tell me, you intentionally sent him to his death. Li Ben stammered. What? That's not true. He explained that Captain Jia himself requested it. A few moments later, they arrived at the location. Li Ben said, "We're here." The protagonist noticed something strange. Song Rui asked what was wrong. He said the area was filled with aberrations, but he couldn't smell any crimson fog. In Li Ben's mind, he was panicking, thinking, we need to leave, now. The protagonist's friend noticed Li Ben acting strangely while holding his phone. He quickly approached him, asking, "What are you trying to do?" Li Ben answered that he had already brought them to the incident site, so his job was done. He said he had already called his squad to pick him up. As he walked away, he said, "Tell Officer Song I'll leave the search and rescue to him. I'm leaving now." But the protagonist and Song Rui stopped him, telling him that he wasn't going anywhere. Song Rui sternly asked, "Tell us, what's your real purpose?" Before he could answer, a violent storm formed in the sky, with thunder crackling above them. Li Ben fell to the ground in fear, screaming that it was coming. Everyone looked up. Then, a powerful lightning bolt struck down from the heavens, hitting the ground in front of them and causing a massive explosion. Seeing this, Li Ben screamed that he didn't want to die yet. The protagonist said, "I was right. This is why there aren't any low-level aberrations around." Song Rui was shocked and realized, this is the Thunder Beast. Before them appeared an Overlord-class Thunder Beast, roaring fiercely as lightning surged around its entire body. The monster looked at them, its eyes gleaming with a terrifying light as its entire body slowly became wrapped in blazing lightning. They could feel the weight of the energy around them, and every spark of lightning cracked through the air like an explosion. The protagonist's friend stepped back, clearly frozen in fear. He shouted, "It's an Overlord class." They were almost deafened by the monster's roar. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Why would a monster like this suddenly appear here? The protagonist replied in a cold tone, his eyes fixed on the creature. "Perhaps," he said, "the strange behavior of the monsters these past few days, along with the disappearance of the entire patrol team during their mission, these aren't just coincidences." While the protagonist was speaking, his friend noticed that Li Ben was quietly backing away. He slowly began to run, clearly trying to escape. Song Rui immediately noticed and shouted in a heavy voice, "Catch him. Don't let him get away." Without hesitation, the protagonist's friend responded and chased after him. "Don't run," he shouted. But as Li Ben ran, he yelled back nervously, "Why not? He doesn't want to die here for nothing." As he kept running, he glanced toward the monster. "It's gathering energy," he cried out. "The breath attack is coming." At that moment, the monster began to gather a bluish light in its mouth, an electric blue energy that crackled through the air, ready to explode at any second. Then, in an instant, the monster unleashed its devastating attack. The protagonist ducked low, almost scraping the ground to avoid it. Song Rui quickly leapt into the air, dodging the deadly surge of energy. The attack struck behind the protagonist, and with a massive explosion, the ground shook violently. The protagonist gasped. "Looks like getting out of here won't be that easy," he thought, staring at the monster as electricity built up in its body once again. Song Rui approached, weaponless, and said that he would hold the monster off while he retrieved his weapon. The protagonist nodded. "No problem," he said. Meanwhile, on top of a nearby building, a man watched the battle below in silence, a deceptive smile curling on his lips. "Let's see," he muttered, "if he'll still act so tough now." His subordinate, looking nervous, stepped forward. "Boss," he said, "is it really true that such a small device can control an Overlord-class beast?" He pointed to the large container behind them, inside which a glowing crystal pulsed with light. The boss grinned. "Not just that," he replied. "The technology they're using, it's beyond anything they can imagine." He continued, "They've already built a beast taming facility. I saw it with my own eyes. The creatures they're raising there, those aren't ordinary monsters. And once they capture the protagonist and hand him over, Chishi City will be mine. Meanwhile, in the middle of the battlefield, the protagonist charged forward. His eyes glowed red as he analyzed the creature's movement. It's an elemental-type beast, he murmured to himself. It fights using energy. He leapt onto the monster, gripping his weapon tightly, as energy began to gather in his transformed arm. The poison glands he got from the queen bee, he thought. They should work even on an overlord-class beast. But before he could strike, the monster let out a thunderous roar, a sound like an earthquake, then released a surge of lightning that tore through the air. The protagonist was forced back, struck by a wave of electricity that sent him crashing to the ground. He nearly fell to his knees. My beast form, he muttered, was forced to deactivate. He could feel his strength weakening rapidly. He thought, its ability, it's similar to Song Rui's electromagnetic annihilation shells. While he was still processing the thought, the monster began gathering even stronger energy in its hands, blue lightning flashing violently in the darkness. It suddenly attacked, slamming its hand into the ground. Luckily, the protagonist managed to leap away just in time. When the strike hit the ground, the energy erupted outward like a wave of electricity. The earth trembled and cracked, glowing faintly with lightning. The protagonist sighed heavily. I can't afford to lose focus, he whispered. Kneeling, he watched the monster continue to radiate lightning energy. He could feel the heat and pressure in the air. This is different from a normal overlord-class beast, he thought. With that lightning wrapping its body, I can't even get close. Suddenly, Song Rui spoke. We just need to remove its lightning armor, right? He asked. The protagonist looked at him. Can you do that? Song Rui smiled. Of course. My beast core ability came from a thunder beast itself. My electricity can neutralize surrounding particles, it can nullify other abilities. As he adjusted the position of his weapon, he explained, if I use the annihilation shell at full power, I can cancel out its lightning armor, but only temporarily. It'll regenerate quickly. The protagonist ran toward the monster, shouting through the roaring wind, that's enough. I only need one moment. Leave the rest to me. At that instant, the monster roared again, a deafening cry of rage and power. The protagonist gave Song Rui the signal and shouted, now. Song Rui unleashed his ultimate attack, electromagnetic annihilation shell. His weapon released a burst of violet energy, a blinding flash that shot straight into the monster. The air ignited, and within seconds, the monster's lightning armor vanished. The protagonist seized the opportunity. From above, he shouted, beast form, claws, and venom. His hands, glowing with red energy, slashed down from the sky, striking the monster directly. How do you like the queen bee's venom? He roared, following up with rapid strikes. As the fight went on, he noticed the monster's movements slowing down. It's working, he whispered. The poison's taking effect. Each of the monster's movements grew sluggish and heavy. When it tried to attack, the protagonist easily dodged and countered, slashing left and right, across its neck, chest, and arms, shouting, die. Its attacks are powerful, he muttered while continuing his assault. Stronger than the last overlord-class beast, but once its lightning disappeared, its physical strength dropped drastically. He took a deep breath. If not for Captain Song's annihilation shell, I wouldn't have been able to get close. I still need to become stronger. As he spoke, he noticed the monster staggering away, bleeding and trembling. He called out to it, saying, leaving already. Since you came all this way, you could at least leave me something, don't you think? From a distance, the boss's subordinate saw what was happening. Boss. The monster's about to lose. He shouted. But the boss remained silent, expressionless, his cold eyes fixed on the scene. Meanwhile, Song Rui stood watching the protagonist. In his mind, he thought, he's improved so much in just a few days, I'll need to get stronger too. But at that very moment, he didn't realize that another creature was slowly approaching from behind him. On top of the building, the boss smirked as he watched. Who said? He murmured, that I only brought one Overlord-class beast to deal with them. His subordinate gasped in shock. Wait. Does that mean there's another one? In an instant, Song Rui turned around, and there he saw it. A massive monster with green skin, glowing eyes, and a mouth full of razor-sharp fangs. It lunged toward him, and before he could react, he realized, there really was another one. Another Overlord-class beast. The chapter ends here. Watch out for our upcoming uploads. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you'll always be updated on our future videos.